3 women ate Christmas cake at a family gathering in Brazil. Within hours, all 3 were dead. But the killer had made one crucial mistake. She'd searched "how much arsenic kills a person" on her phone 3 weeks before baking began. Torres is a small coastal city in southern Brazil, known for its beaches and the annual balloon festival that fills the sky with color each May. On December 23, 2024, the Dos Anjos family gathered in this peaceful place for their traditional Christmas celebration, a Bolo de Natal, the Brazilian Christmas cake that had been Zeli dos Anjos' specialty for 30 years. The house smelled of cinnamon and raisins. Wrapped presents waited under a modest tree. 7 family members sat down to share cake and coffee, continuing a tradition that stretched back generations. By nightfall, 3 of them would be dead. Zeli dos Anjos had spent the morning of December 23rd, the way she'd spent every December 23rd for 3 decades, in her kitchen, carefully measuring flour and sugar for her famous Christmas cake. At 61, she was the matriarch of a close-knit family, the kind of woman neighbors called when they needed a recipe or advice about their gardens. Her sister Maida, 58, always joked that Zeli could make anything grow, from tomatoes to grandchildren's smiles. That afternoon, the house on the quiet street filled with familiar voices. Maida arrived first, as always, helping arrange the table with the good china they only used for holidays. Their older sister Neuza, 65, came next, bringing her daughter Tatiana, 43, and Tatiana's 10-year-old son, Matthias. Zeli's husband, Diego, and her daughter-in-law, Deise Moura, completed the gathering. The cake sat at the center of the table, a traditional Bolo de Natal dense with dried fruits and nuts, its top glazed to a perfect shine. In Brazilian Christmas tradition, sharing cake isn't just about dessert. It's about gathering, about marking another year survived together, about sweet wishes for the year ahead. Zeli cut generous slices, making sure everyone got a piece with plenty of fruit. "It tastes different this year," Neuza mentioned after her first bite. Several others nodded. There was something sharp, almost peppery, cutting through the sweetness. Zeli herself noticed it. This wasn't how her cake usually tasted. But Christmas preparations are stressful, ingredients can vary, and no one wanted to hurt Zeli's feelings about a recipe she'd perfected over decades. Within an hour, the coffee cups sat abandoned. Maida was the first to clutch her stomach, rushing to the bathroom. Neuza followed, her face pale and sweating. Young Matthias began crying that his stomach hurt. One by one, all 7 who'd eaten the cake began experiencing violent symptoms: vomiting, dizziness, burning sensations in their throats. Tatiana collapsed first. As her family scrambled to call an ambulance, Maida fell to the kitchen floor. The same kitchen where, just hours before, they'd been laughing about childhood Christmas memories. Neuza tried to reach her daughter but couldn't stand, her legs failing beneath her. The emergency calls started at 7:47 p.m. By the time the first ambulance arrived at 8:03 p.m., the house that had smelled of cinnamon now reeked of something else, the sharp, metallic scent of fear. Paramedics found a scene they'd never forget. 3 women unconscious or barely breathing, 2 men violently ill, an elderly woman in shock, and a child screaming in pain. At Torres Hospital, the emergency room erupted into controlled chaos. 3 women arrived in critical condition, with 4 more patients showing severe poisoning symptoms. Dr. Marina Santos, the attending physician, immediately recognized this wasn't food poisoning or an allergic reaction. The symptoms were too severe, too synchronized. This was something else. Maida Berenice Flores da Silva died at 11:30 p.m. She was 58 years old, a retired school teacher who'd spent 40 years teaching children to read in the local elementary school. Her students, now adults, would later fill social media with memories of a woman who kept extra sandwiches in her desk drawer for kids who came to school hungry. Neuza Denise Silva dos Anjos died at 1:15 a.m. on December 24th, technically Christmas Eve. At 65, she'd been the eldest sister, the one who remembered their mother's original cake recipe, the one who called every family member on their birthday without fail. The cause of death was listed as shock after poisoning. Tatiana Silvia dos Santos passed away at 2:45 a.m. At 43, she left behind young Matthias, who would survive but spend 4 days in the hospital recovering. Tatiana had been planning to take him to see the ocean for the first time after Christmas. The trip tickets were still in her purse when she died. Detective Marcus Veloso of the Torres Police Civil Division received the call at 3 a.m. on Christmas Eve. 3 women dead after a family gathering, 4 more hospitalized. His first thought was botulism or contaminated ingredients. Tragic, but not criminal. That changed the moment he walked into the Dos Anjos house. The Christmas tree lights were still blinking. Wrapped presents sat unopened. Coffee cups with lipstick marks sat next to plates with half-eaten cake. It looked like everyone had simply vanished mid-celebration. But what caught Veloso's attention wasn't what he saw. It was what the emergency room doctor told him on the phone. "Detective, we've run preliminary tests. This isn't bacterial. The symptoms are consistent with heavy metal poisoning. I think someone put something in that food." The investigation began in that kitchen at 4 a.m. on Christmas Eve, while most of Torres still slept. Veloso and his team photographed everything before touching anything, a basic technique that would prove crucial later. They bagged the remaining cake, collected the flour and sugar containers, documented every ingredient in Zeli's pantry. The laboratory results came back on December 26th. Arsenic. Massive amounts of it in the cake, in the victim's blood, and most tellingly, in the flour container in Zeli's kitchen. But arsenic doesn't just appear in flour. Someone had put it there. Someone who knew that flour would become a Christmas cake that the whole family would share. Veloso began with the basics. Who had access to the house? Who knew about the Christmas gathering? Who might want multiple members of this family dead? The investigation led him through financial records. No one stood to gain significantly from these deaths. He examined recent conflicts. The family seemed remarkably close, with no major disputes. Then, on December 29th, a digital forensics officer made a discovery that changed everything. While examining family members' devices for any clues, they found something on Deise Moura's phone. On December 2nd, 3 weeks before the Christmas gathering, someone had searched arsenic poisoning symptoms. On December 3rd, how much arsenic kills a person. On December 5th, where to buy arsenic in Brazil. The searches had been deleted from the browser history, but not from the phone's deeper memory cache. It's a common misconception that deleting browser history erases everything. Digital forensics specialists know that phones keep multiple layers of data, some invisible to regular users. Deise Moura had tried to cover her tracks, but technology betrayed her. Detective Veloso now had probable cause, but he needed more. Why would a daughter-in-law want to kill her husband's family? The investigation took a turn that no one expected. Hospital records showed that in September 2024, just 3 months before the Christmas poisoning, Zeli's husband, Paulo Luis, had died from what doctors called acute food poisoning. He and Zeli had eaten mashed bananas from their garden. Paulo died within hours. Zeli survived. At the time, doctors attributed it to contamination from flooding that had affected the region. No autopsy was performed. No investigation was opened. But now, with 3 more family members dead from poison, Detective Veloso saw a pattern. He obtained a court order to exhume Paulo Luis's body. If arsenic was found in his remains, this wasn't just a Christmas tragedy. It was a serial poisoning case that had started months earlier. The deeper investigators looked into the Dos Anjos family dynamics, the more they uncovered. Multiple family members, when questioned separately, admitted what they'd kept quiet for years. Deise and Zeli had been in conflict for 2 decades. It started small. Disagreements about household chores, criticism about cooking, tension over money. But in Brazilian culture, particularly in traditional families, daughter-in-law and mother-in-law relationships carry enormous weight. The wife moves into the husband's family sphere, expected to adapt, to prove herself worthy of the family name. Deise had felt like an outsider for 20 years. Family members recalled Christmas gatherings where Deise would help serve but rarely sit down to eat. Photos showed her standing at the edges, physically present but emotionally distant. One cousin mentioned that Deise had complained that Zeli criticized everything: her cooking, her housekeeping, even how she raised her children. She never said it directly, the cousin told police, but you could see it in her eyes during family gatherings. 20 years of resentment, building up like pressure in a pot. The investigation revealed that financial stress had intensified the conflict. Diego and Deise were struggling with debt. Meanwhile, Zeli and Paulo had been comfortable, owning their home outright, helping other family members, but allegedly ignoring their son's financial troubles. Whether this was true or perception didn't matter anymore. Perception had become deadly reality. On January 5, 2025, Detective Veloso's team made the arrest. They found Deise Moura at her home in Nova Santa Rita, a town about 90 kilometers from Torres. She'd been staying with relatives since the poisoning, claiming she couldn't bear to return to the scene of such tragedy. When police arrived at 11 p.m., she was in her pajamas, getting ready for bed. She didn't resist. She didn't seem surprised. The forensic analysis of the flour told a chilling story. Arsenic doesn't distribute evenly when mixed into flour. It creates patterns, like geological layers in rock. By analyzing these patterns, forensic chemists could determine that the poison had been added at least 2 weeks before the cake was baked. This wasn't a moment of rage. This was planning. The technique Detective Veloso's team used to trace the arsenic was fascinating in its simplicity. They collected samples from different depths of the flour container, like taking core samples from ice in Antarctica. The deeper layers showed no contamination. The poison appeared only in the top portion, the portion that would be used first for holiday baking. But where had the arsenic come from? Brazil heavily regulates arsenic sales. It's not something you can buy at a pharmacy or garden store. Investigators traced recent arsenic purchases in the region, focusing on industrial suppliers and pest control companies. They found an unusual purchase from early December. Someone had bought ant poison containing arsenic compounds from a farm supply store 2 towns over. The buyer had paid cash, but security footage showed a woman matching Deise's description. The investigation technique that ultimately sealed the case wasn't high-tech. It was careful timeline construction. Detective Veloso created what investigators call a reverse chronology, working backward from the deaths to establish opportunity. They discovered that Deise had visited Zeli's house alone on December 10th, supposedly to help with early Christmas preparations. Zeli had been at a doctor's appointment. Deise had a key. She had been alone in that kitchen for 3 hours. The medical examiner's final report revealed something even more disturbing. The amount of arsenic in the cake wasn't consistent with trying to make people sick. It was a lethal dose, multiplied by 3. Whoever did this understood that people would take different-sized slices, that some might eat more than others. They'd added enough poison to ensure that anyone who ate even a small piece would receive a fatal dose. This calculation, the medical examiner explained, suggested knowledge of arsenic's effects. Those Google searches on Daise's phone weren't just casual curiosity. She'd been studying, learning, planning exactly how much poison she'd need to kill multiple people while making it look like food contamination. On January 6th, as Deise sat in custody, investigators made one more discovery. In September, when Paulo Luis had died from food poisoning, Deise had been the one who prepared the mashed bananas. She'd brought them to Zeli and Paulo, saying she'd made too much for her own family. It was a gesture of kindness, of daughterly duty. Paulo had eaten most of it. Zeli had only taken a few bites, claiming she wasn't hungry. The exhumation of Paulo Luis was scheduled for January 9th. If arsenic was found in his remains, Deise Moura would face 4 counts of murder, not 3. The woman who'd felt like an outsider at family gatherings had allegedly found a way to destroy the family from within. As news of the arrest spread through Torres, the community struggled to comprehend what had happened. This wasn't supposed to happen here. This wasn't supposed to happen at Christmas. In a country where family bonds are sacred, where Christmas represents unity and forgiveness, the idea that someone would use a Christmas cake, that symbol of love and tradition, as a weapon was almost incomprehensible. The Dos Anjos house stood empty as 2025 began. The Christmas tree was still up, its lights unplugged. The presents remained unopened under the tree. Neighbors reported that at night, they could sometimes smell phantom scents of cinnamon and cake from the empty house, as if the ghost of happier Christmases lingered in the walls. Zeli dos Anjos survived the poisoning, but remained hospitalized in critical condition into January. The woman who'd spent decades perfecting her Christmas cake recipe, who'd made it with love for her family year after year, had unknowingly served death at her own table. Doctors weren't sure if she'd ever fully recover, physically or emotionally. Her great-nephew Matthias, the 10-year-old who survived, was released from the hospital on December 27th. Child psychologists were working with him, trying to help him process a trauma no child should experience. He'd watched his mother die on Christmas Eve. He'd eaten cake that was meant to kill him. How do you explain that to a 10-year-old? How do you make him feel safe at family gatherings again? The Torres police held a press conference on January 8th, 2025. Detective Veloso stood before microphones and explained how modern investigation techniques had solved this case. The digital forensics that revealed deleted searches, the forensic chemistry that dated when poison was added to flour, the careful timeline construction that showed opportunity and planning. But he also talked about what investigation techniques couldn't explain. How 20 years of resentment had fermented into murder. How a family tradition became a weapon. How someone could sit at a Christmas gathering, watch children eat poisoned cake, and say nothing. Deise Moura was formally charged with triple homicide and triple attempted homicide. If convicted, she faces 30 years to life in prison under Brazilian law. Her lawyer claims she's innocent, that the internet searches were research for a novel she was writing. The trial is expected to begin in mid-2025. The case has sparked a national conversation in Brazil about family dynamics, particularly the pressure placed on daughters-in-law in traditional families. Mental health professionals point out that while millions of people experience family conflict, the leap to violence requires a specific psychological break. They emphasize that this case, horrific as it is, represents an extreme aberration, not a common outcome of family tension. The Dos Anjos family Christmas cake recipe, perfected over 30 years, will never be made again. The family members who survived have decided to retire it forever. Some traditions, once poisoned, can't be reclaimed. 3 women, Maida, Neuza, and Tatiana, died not because they were specific targets, but because they were there. Because they showed up for family. Because they ate cake at Christmas like they'd done every year before. Their deaths remind us that the deepest betrayals come from within, from people we trust enough to eat their food without question. The investigation techniques that solved this case, digital forensics, chemical analysis, timeline construction, are tools we have now that didn't exist a generation ago. Deise Moura allegedly thought she could poison a family and blame it on contaminated ingredients. She didn't count on phones remembering what users try to forget, or flour telling stories about when poison was added, or security cameras in farm stores 2 towns over. So here's what haunts me about this case. For 20 years, this family gathered for Christmas. For 20 years, they shared cake and coffee. How many of those gatherings included silent resentment so deep it was planning murder? When did disappointment become rage, and rage become lethal intent? Was it sudden, or did it build bite by bite, Christmas by Christmas, until poison seemed like the only solution? Drop a comment with your thoughts. What details stuck with you most about this case? The digital evidence? The 20-year buildup? Or the fact that it happened at Christmas, using the very tradition meant to bring family together? If you're into this kind of deep dive storytelling, the full investigation plus the human story behind it, subscribe. This has been Umbra Cases.